Today, crypto prices crater alongside global financial markets. We ask Matt Hougan, the Chief Investment Officer at Bitwise Asset Management, to break down the moves and what could be coming next. Welcome to CNBC's Crypto World. I'm Tanea McKeel. Crypto markets getting hit with a steep sell-off to kickstart the week, following a sharp drop in financial markets around the globe. By noon Eastern, Bitcoin shaved nearly 8% off its price, tumbling all the way down to the $54,000 mark. The cryptocurrency actually recovered from the worst of the pullback. At one point, it was trading below $50,000. Meanwhile, today's flight from risk assets also hitting Ether, which fell 13% in the past 24 hours. Solana dropping more modestly to $130. In terms of impact on publicly traded crypto-focused stocks, you've got exchanges like Coinbase and miners like Riot and Marathon Digital all falling between 2.8 and 4.3% by around midday. CleanSpark, though, a big outlier, falling around 12%. All of the mining stocks at one point down double digits earlier in the morning. Now, some experts joined CNBC this morning to weigh in on the crypto sell-off. While on CNBC's Squawk Box today, Fundstrat's Tom Lee pointed to the Japanese market as one driver of the overall market sell-off. Tezos co-founder Kathleen Brightman also weighed in on what could be behind crypto's tumble.
I think basically what we're seeing is something similar to what happened at the beginning of COVID, where folks get a sense of something that looks like a recession, and the first thing they decide to sell is their pretend internet money. I think Bitcoin gets a bit of a shellacking because it's definitely cast more as a speculative currency. It's not treated the same as a lot of other equities.
Now, backing out for just a moment to look at the year so far, the recent drop in prices has eaten into both Bitcoin and Ether's gains for 2024, but both are still in the green. Bitcoin has risen 28% since January, while Ether lags the S&P 500, having gained only 8% in that time. At one point this morning, Ether did erase its year-to-date gain. All right, sticking with markets as we jump right to our main story. I spoke with Matt Hougan, CIO of Bitwise Asset Management, about today's crypto rout and where he thinks the market could be headed next. This rout in risk assets, crypto, no stranger obviously to volatility or to 30% drops in a bull market, but it is kind of different every year as Bitcoin matures more and more. So on a day like this, what does a sell-off like this mean to you? And, what is your message to investors?
Yeah, it's great to be back. I see this as an opportunity. What's stuck in my mind this morning is this feels exactly like March 12th of 2020, which was the last time we had a coordinated global sell-off in capital markets. That was the day, of course, we realized that COVID was impacting the global economy in a massive way. The Dow fell 2,400 points and crypto fell sharply. Bitcoin fell 37% that day. And everyone hemmed and hawed. Isn't it supposed to be a risk asset? Isn't it supposed to be a hedge? But guess what happened? In the year that followed, it rose more than 10x, back above $57,000. I see the same thing here. We have a global capital markets sell-off that impacted the crypto market on a low liquidity weekend. But nothing has changed fundamentally about Bitcoin or about crypto, except that we're closer to the Fed lowering rates. We're closer to quantitative easing. I see that as more of a catalyst than a headwind. So I look at today as painful, but an opportunity to position for the long term.
Unsurprisingly, and you've probably gotten this question as much as I have, but the first thing people want to know is about that narrative. They see that Bitcoin and crypto-related stocks are going down with the broader stock market, and this is really supposed to be a time, supposedly, that Bitcoin bucks the trend. So what do you say to that? And, perhaps the question is for whom, for what type of investor is Bitcoin a hedge against uncertainty, let's call it?
Or maybe over what time? I actually remember if you go back pre-Bitcoin, like 2008 financial crisis, when that crisis really hit home, guess what? Gold sold off at that time. People will sell anything that's liquid during a market crisis. The fact that this crisis hit on a weekend when most markets were closed, of course, people would reach to crypto to sell. It was the only outlet they had. I don't think it changes long term. I think it is a great hedge asset during times of uncertainty if you're willing to hold it for more than a day, for months, for quarters, for years. That's what we've seen during every previous crisis. It always falls. People always panic about whether it's a hedge asset or not. And then every time it has recovered and played its role. They teach you in finance that this time is different are the four most expensive words in investing. And that's true in Bitcoin as well. This time is not different. Of course, we sold off with risk assets, and I believe we will rebound in the future.
Is that historical price performance what investors should kind of be hanging on to then? I mean, certainly there are people out there who really want to try to make sense of this. Sometimes it is correlated to gold and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's correlated to stocks. And would your advice be to just look at that historical price performance? Or is there something more to say about how Bitcoin can be all of these different things at the same time?
And it's a new thing. It's a challenge to have something that's both an emerging technology and therefore a risk asset, and also something that is a natural hedge against chaos, or at least the government's response to chaos, which is always to print money. And it's both of those things at the same time. And that sort of blows people's minds. But if you look historically how that plays out, the way it plays out is pretty simple. Over a very short term period, it behaves like a risk asset. And over longer periods of time, it plays that role as a hedge. If you look since COVID, the dollar's lost 25% of its value. Bitcoin is up hundreds of percent. It's done a great job protecting you against the inflation that followed COVID. Did it do a great job every single day? Absolutely not. If that's what you want, you need an inverse position in the S&P 500. But if what you're looking at is to protect your savings, your retirement, your investments over a year, over 5 years, over 10 years, Bitcoin's track record is exceptional. And I think you just have to be willing to hold those two things in your mind at the same time, which I know is challenging. Even I wrestle with it, but at least that's what history teaches you is true.
Okay, so what happened here? We've talked about the significance and we've gotten a little bit philosophical, but what exactly happened here? My sense is that this is obviously primarily macro driven. There are, of course, little things happening within crypto, but what do the events of the last 72 hours look like from where you were sitting?
Yeah, so from a short-term perspective, you have to ask yourself, have we hit the bottom, right? Because often what happens in crypto is that pullbacks feed on themselves. You see the market drop, and that causes liquidations in the futures market, and the market drops more, and maybe a firm or two gets into trouble and blows up, and eventually it exhausts itself and gets to the bottom. So I don't think we know for sure if we've gotten to that bottom or not. Certainly liquidations have slowed down, but these effects sort of take multiple days to see if we've hit that bottom. I think from a trader's perspective, that's what I would do. Watch liquidations and watch the stability of firms. Once that clears, the thing to monitor is, do we see sort of central bankers and institutions moving in to open the sort of spigots? Do we see Fed rate cuts come in faster than previously expected? Do we see global bankers around the world cutting rates? Do we see sort of quantitative easing measures? That's the playbook. And to separate those two, the short-term question, because it can feed on itself. We don't know if we've hit bottom yet. And then the long-term catalysts, and just evaluate those separately, and I think you'll be okay.
What are your clients saying? You have these new crypto ETFs that began trading this year. Have you heard from your clients? Are they panicked?
Yeah, it's amazing. We've had very few calls today so far from clients. I think people who allocate to crypto using the ETFs have a few percent of their net worth in crypto, and they know that it's a volatile asset. And at least for Bitwise's clients in our Bitcoin ETF BitB or ETH ETF ETHW, they're buying it for the long term, expecting it to be volatile. In fact, if you look at Bitwise's history, we've been around for 7 years. We had inflows in 2018. That was a terrible year from crypto. Crypto is a high conviction, small allocation bet for most investors. So I suspect what you'll see out of these ETFs is remarkable stickiness. I don't think you're going to see massive outflows. I think you might even see some small inflows over the course of the next 2 weeks, because these investors are making long-term bets in an asset that they know is volatile. And guess what? We're reminded of that again today. It sure is volatile, but let's look at it over a longer time period.
We know, and you've said in this conversation, that the setup is still strong. The thesis has not changed. So given everything going on, do we still retest Bitcoin's record this year? And do we get a new all-time high still this year?
Yeah, I still think we're going to all-time highs this year. The things that could prevent that is if we see sort of the Democratic side of the presidential ticket leaning hard into the anti-crypto stance. But I don't think that's what we're going to see. I think we're going to see that side of the ticket moderating. The other side of the ticket is pro-crypto. And so I think we're going to get a relatively positive result in November. As long as that happens, I think we're heading toward new all-time highs. In fact, we might sort of go higher than I expected if we see a strong policy response. So, I'd say that's the bias, but of course there are still risks out there in the market.
Okay, that's all for Crypto World today. As always, you can keep up to date with the latest crypto price moves at cnbc.com. We'll be back again tomorrow, and we'll see you then.